Mitra take immense pleasure in introducing our speaker session in just a few moments. We'll commence with the Startup Founder Speaker session with Mr. Prabhat Kumar Tiwari, and he will take us through his startup journey. Mr. Prabhat Kumar Tiwari is the CEO and CMD of Your Own Room, a residential prop tech rental and property management business that provides strategically located, good quality, managed co-living and family homes to millennials that are safe and comfortable. Your Own Room is currently managing over 300 residential properties valued at $30 million across Bangalore and Pune. He is an alumnus of Stanford Business School and he has a degree in computer science engineering from Birla Institute of Technology, Ranchi. He has 25 years of experience in technology enterprises and startups. Before this, he was the senior vice president at Exchanging. He has also worked in senior leadership and management positions at companies like Emphasis, Zensor, and HP. It's true when they say that passion can drive you to places, which is accurate in the case of Mr. Tiwari's journey. Even with miles of distance between us, I'm sure everyone is thrilled to hear about his journey and learnings. So, without further ado, I would request Mr. Tiwari to take it from here.
Sure. Thank you so much, Pratiksha, for such a wonderful introduction. I really appreciate that. So here is what I was thinking I could do today. Maybe I could take about 30 minutes and talk a little bit about me, my journey, my startup, and more importantly about residential real estate as a sector, because that's where the innovation lies from a startup perspective. So I thought I'll take about 30 minutes and talk about that. And then I think we'll leave it open. We'll have Q&A. You're welcome to ask me any questions, in any form. So that's how I was thinking, we could drive that. And what I will do is, yeah, let me start then. Okay. So you all can see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So first of all, let me tell you what prompted me to start Your Own Room. So I was very clear in my mind that I always wanted to solve a real world problem, which was large in scale. I wanted to, and I always liked real estate as a sector because that's something that always fascinated me. So after working for about 20 odd years, especially in various technology organizations, I was beginning to see two distinct things. On one hand, I would see that there were lots of singles, millennials who were coming from different cities across India to places like Bangalore, and they were just struggling to get decent accommodations. They never had a safe, secure places. Most of the places that they stay, they were compromising on something very basic. They were spending enormous time on the traffic, commuting, and remember, every time you spend 2 hours, 3 hours in traffic, it just drains away all the energy from you. So this was one very clear problem which I could sense. The second one, I had a lot of friends who were just struggling to basically manage properties, right? Some of the properties were closed, some of the properties were idle, and they were just not getting enough rents. They were not getting cash flows out of their investments and so on. So they were struggling on the other hand. And then there were so many empty properties all over the country. At the minute you start driving and go away from the main city, you start to see a lot of these empty houses and so on. So on one hand, there was huge demand coming from a segment which is totally underserved. On the other hand, you had a lot of homeowners who were struggling to manage their properties. And after seeing that for a very long time, I also was reflecting on my journey. And at Stanford, having spent some time there, I always had the desire and the passion to do something of my own. I want to do something of my own. I want to do something more large scale. And a lot of my past experiences also taught me different things. Some taught me how to manage customers, some taught me how to manage large organizations, and my last job taught me how to deal, with managing P&L and so on. So from a timing perspective, I just felt that, things were falling in place and it was time to do something of my own. And that's how I started Your Own Room. I said, let me try to solve this larger than life problem in the real estate sector. Now, what I would like to do is I would like to give you a little bit of an appreciation of real estate as a segment. Now, see, real estate as a sector, if you look at it, it is the backbone of our Indian economy. And look at some of these numbers over here. See, we are at about close to 200 billion. It's a $200 billion market, real estate. And you all know what our GDP today is, maybe 2 trillion. So 1/10 of our entire GDP is real estate. So that's the size we're talking about. And if you look at it, look at the number of people who are employed. We talk about anywhere between maybe 60 million just in real estate, and 1/5, 1/6 of this is residential real estate. So fundamentally, this is extremely critical for the larger success of the nation, and this is a huge sector that we are talking about. Now, what I also want to bring to your attention is that, see, there are, we're living in very disruptive times. And we need to understand that during these disruptive times, there are various types of disruption going on. On one hand, you have the emergence of millennials, right? If you look at the number of millennials, we talk about huge numbers today, run in big numbers. You see that there's a lot of urbanization happening. Everyone wants to come to the larger cities. It was first the 4 cities, then it became the 6 metros. So there's huge urbanization, whereas the infrastructure in these cities is not kept up to pace. So there's struggle in terms of traffic, in terms of pollution, in terms of so many other stuff. Then there have been some big shocks that have happened in our economy. For example, demonetization. I mean, demonetization basically was also led to a larger behavioral change, because demonetization basically meant that there is a certain new way of dealing with currency in the economy. Technology, if you look at it, I mean, today, technology is something that has always been adopted by people, but look at how pervasive technology has become. I mean, without a smartphone, without a laptop, it's very difficult. You use that to order food, you use that to make all kinds of payments, you use it in every walks of life, education, just name it. And then payments, the whole concept of currency has gone away. It's all about digital payments, Paytm, and so on. And then, of course, there is a lot of unused inventory of properties lying. Just to give you a sense, there are 11 million vacant properties in urban India. And if you look at it, today there are 500,000 ready and unsold properties worth about close to $50 billion. There are another 1 million properties which are in various stages of construction, almost, which spans across close to about 4 years or maybe 3.5 to 4 years, which is valued at about 100 billion. So about $150 billion of assets that is stuck in different stages in the entire construction as well as sales life cycle. And last, COVID. I think we've spoken about COVID in different forums. But fundamentally, what COVID has done is it has led to a complete, I would call it a reset button. So if you look at these 7 forces, now all these forces, I think by itself has had a big impact. But when they all come together, it just creates a very compounded impact. And that's what is happening. And if you look at it, on one hand, as I mentioned to you, I was seeing a very clear gap in terms of demand and supply in the residential real estate space. Owners were struggling to get good economic returns, or investors were struggling to get good. And then you have all these 7 market forces. Now put everything together, and all this was basically leading to extremely high degree of inefficiency in the residential real estate ecosystem. And keep in mind that sometimes a problem is, leads to, disruptions. It leads to new paradigms and so on. And the fundamental disruption or the largest disruption which we have experienced in the recent past in the residential real estate is the fundamental mindset from owning an asset to sharing and renting an asset. If I can give you a small example, um, you would have seen this in the automobile space where people would prefer to use a Uber or Ola than own a car by themselves. You see this in the technology space where instead of buying a software license, people are now beginning to take softwares on subscription basis. So it's happening everywhere in different forms. So it's happening everywhere. The same thing is happening over here where the disruption is from owning to renting and sharing an asset. Now, this has led to two new paradigms. The first one is the rise of rental and property management. Remember, rental and property management is a service layer that sits on top of a physical asset. A physical asset is nothing but a home, an apartment, a complex. But the real value gets unearthed when you actually create a service layer on top of it. And the second one is rise of co-living homes, compact homes and affordable homes. Now, if you look at a lot of the demand, it is coming from a very different sector of people. So if you look at real estate for a minute, the residential real estate, you have apartments, you have houses, and you have millions across the country. But the demand is not just coming from, in the past, it used to come a lot from the regular families or traditional families. Today, it is coming from students. It's coming from young people. It's coming from singles. It's coming from senior citizens. It's coming from different sectors of people whose requirement is not just a 2-bedroom house or a 3-bedroom house. It is different formats of residential space. It could be a hostel. It could be a co-living home. It could be compact homes. It could be affordable homes, so on. So fundamentally, if I were to summarize this disruption, PropTech based rental and property management. Remember, rental and property management in the past, a lot of it was very small and a lot of it was done in a very traditional way. Now it is all happening through technology. Technology is in the forefront, right? If you have seen fintech in the financial world, if you have seen technology in food tech in the food world, maybe you've seen it in mobility space, you're now beginning to see it in the real estate space, and that's what it's called prop tech, property technology. And basically what is happening is it will no longer just be about residential assets. So the future is going to be about the residential asset and a service, a technology-based service sitting on the top of the residential asset. Now, what has happened is it has led to the rise of co-living. There's a very interesting statement made by Deepak Parekh from HDFC, where he said that real estate will do well with right developers, right pricing, and right unit size. And hence, student housing, retirement homes, co-living will be the new reality growth drivers. Very, very profound statement made by Deepak Parekh. And today, if you look at it, this entire thing of co-living is in its nascent stage. The adoption levels are very high from millennials. But if you were to look at the market today, it's close to about $6.5 billion. But out of the $6.5 billion, keep in mind that only 2.5% is managed, 2.5% is owned by all the organized players. And this number in the next 5 years will go to 14 billion with a penetration of all the organized players to 8.3%. So we're talking in the early stages of a massive, I would call it revolution happening in this particular space. Right. Let me tell you a little bit about us. Pratiksha was very kind enough to give a very good introduction. But fundamentally, Your Own Room is a residential real estate PropTech company. We provide rental and property management solutions. We have our own technology platform, which is called our PropTech platform. And this basically helps us deliver our services to our end customer. We manage homes for young people, which includes co-living homes as well as family homes. And we also manage small buildings. Today, there are over 300 properties that we are currently managing in Bangalore and Pune. And if you look at the total value, it's about 200 crores, almost spread across about 0.35 million square feet. And these are some numbers. But I think we are sitting on some very large opportunities. We have contracts signed worth almost close to 50 crores. What we see ourselves, our vision is that we want to be a leading residential asset management company and delivering value to both our end consumer, which are home tenants, as singles, families, etc., and also to the homeowners, which is essentially giving them higher rental yields, giving them uninterrupted cash flow, and so on. See, last 4.5 years, we have spent a lot of our energy going back and working on some basic fundamentals. And basic fundamentals here is about making sure that we have strong unit economics, right? We have to make money at a unit level. So we have cracked that. We are making money at a unit level. We are operationally profitable, and that gives us, a lot of confidence. And on top of it, we have a technology-based execution framework. So both profitability at a unit level and execution at a technology-based execution gives us the confidence to scale this business and make this very big. We see a huge opportunity for some explosive growth over the next 5 years. A lot of the demand is going to be fueled by migrant millennials because they are all coming. Of course, there is temporary challenges because of COVID, etc. But remember, some of these things are beginning to settle down, and maybe the new normal will be that instead of maybe 4.7 million, it could be a smaller number, maybe 10% less, 15% less. Nobody knows at this; it's too early to guess. But fundamentally, these numbers are huge numbers, and I told you about the size of the market. And next 3 to 5 years is all about growth for us, growth, growth, growth. And we are currently about 1,500 beds, 1.5 thousand beds. We want to do 50,000 beds in the next 5 years. We are in various micro markets in these two cities. We are expanding to newer cities like Hyderabad. We are focusing a lot on providing, in addition to our full stack solution, we want to provide a lot of just point-based digital solutions. So we are doing that a lot. And this is very similar to what you would see with companies like NoBroker and so on. And then executive housing essentially are these large assets that we're going to be managing. We already manage assets where you have 100 beds. So these are fairly large assets. We are managing more than about 4 or 5 such assets, both in Bangalore as well as in Pune. There's a couple in Electronic City, then there is a couple in Kharadi in Pune, then there is one in HSR, and so on in Bangalore. We also, at the end, we also see that we have a huge opportunity to partner with some of the larger Indian and global asset management funds. People, so if you look at today, the future of residential real estate is moving towards what I would call it REIT, which is, real estate investment trust, which is about creating a portfolio of rental yielding assets, getting more value out of it, and so on. So we see that that's the future, and we think we can be part of some of these things, with the way we're managing some of these assets, right? So net, if you look at it, if I can conclude at least some of the points that I mentioned, I think first and foremost, I would like to reiterate that real estate as a sector is the backbone of our Indian economy. 1 trillion by 2030. So 10 years from now, this is going to be just $1 trillion, and a good percentage of it is residential, right? And they say that by 2025 it will be 13% of our GDP. So that's like 1/6 of our GDP is going to be real estate. So very, very critical industry, which we need to remember. Huge jobs getting created, right? And jobs are getting created all the way at the CEO level, at an analyst level, at an investment level, at an operations level, sales level, as well as at a blue collar level, where there's constructions and so on. I feel that we are at a point where it's important for us to pause, and COVID actually did that. It's a time where we have paused. I think next 5 years is a lot about survival also. It's about making certain corrections, certain normalizations, and basically conducting various transformation, right? Next 5 years cannot just be about, let me go get a land, let me build some apartments, let me sell the apartments. That's not the formula. The new formula is that you need to start looking at getting maximum value out of your existing assets. Your new assets have to be more demand-led, or new supply has to be more demand-led. And the economic return on a residential property cannot just be capital appreciation, which has been the past formula. The new formula is capital appreciation plus rental yield. So the combination of the two is going to be the economic return. So real estate from an economic benefit has to be looked at it very, very differently. And one of the last points is that companies like us, which are prop tech based rental property management, I think we play a very critical role in basically in the survival mode. Next 5 years, it's companies like us which are trying to basically bring in efficiency in the residential real estate by converting more and more properties into rental yielding assets, by matching demand supply and so on. Next 3 to 5 years will also set the foundation, as I mentioned, for a larger institutional real estate investor to bet big on portfolio of residential properties, and REIT will be a big thing. Now, this basically kind of sums up my presentation, and what I would like to now do is, probably open it up and hear from you guys about your questions, your comments, and I will revisit points depending on whatever questions you have. So I think I wanted to keep it slightly brief so that the intent was to make it more interactive as opposed to just keeping it very dialogue oriented. I think with that, I will certainly welcome questions. If there's any questions, that would be great. Any questions that you'd like to ask, you're welcome.
So, Prabhat, the first question we have got from Pooja. So, Pooja says, how do we know that our startup idea is viable? How do we ensure that our idea doesn't fail?
Okay. So, Pooja, see, first of all, it's very important that when you're building a startup, right? See, today it's also a little bit fashionable to run a startup. To me, I think the starting point of a startup has to be, do you have a clear problem statement or a need that you've identified? If there is a problem statement, if there is a need, great. And this cannot be just based on perception. I think that there is a need for something, or I think there is a problem. Not like that. Something that has been that's real, that is backed with some market research data, something which is very real in terms of problem and or a need. That's the first point. The second point is, do you have a solution? I mean, there may be a lot of problems, right? Today, traffic is messed up in Bangalore, right? All of us know that there's a problem. There's a need to solve the problem. But do you have a solution, a very clear, tangible solution? To me, that's the second point. The third point is, right? Do you have a team that can execute it? Many times, we know the problem, we know the solution, but we don't know how to solve it. So do you have a clear team that can solve the problem? And last point, does it make economic sense, right? Is it going to be a commercially viable business, right? And this, and you guys will have to look at it from a P&L perspective. Does it make gross margin well? Does it make operating margin? Is it EBITDA positive at the unit level? Or is it going to be a loss-making proposition? So if you look at these 4 or 5 different fundamentals, and if you start a startup, I think your chances of success is going to be higher. And one last point, it is always a good idea, in my view, that you reach out to people who have done something like this and take their advice. Tell them, hey, listen, this is my idea. Do you think it makes sense? Right? A lot of people who are experienced folks, right? It could be somebody who's running a startup, or it could be a professor. It could be, some of your friends. Just bounce the idea and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Does it make sense? And I'm telling you, a lot of people come to me with ideas, and many times I see that out of 10 ideas, 8 ideas, 9 ideas, I know are not going to work. Right? And many times when people come to me, I just tell them, hey guys, it's not going to work. Don't worry. Right? And sometimes, people think that maybe, it doesn't sound very good, but this is the reality, right? It's better that you find out that the idea is not going to work much early or upstream in your entire process than finding that downstream after you have spent 1 crore or 2 crores, right? Finding out that you failed, and it will be an expensive failure.
Thanks for the answer. Like the next question is of course like related to COVID. So again, Pooja says how should startups ensure that they remain immune to negative externalities like COVID pandemic? So of course I even read your article. So what's your like how did you manage COVID? Yeah.
So I fundamentally believe that if you look at any business, right, a business has to be built on strong fundamentals. And see, when you run when you run companies, when you do something, when you run a startup after having experience, one of the things which you start to appreciate in life is strong foundation. To me, what is a strong foundation? Strong foundation is a good product, right? It's a good product. It's a good, customers should think good about you, right? It should be commercially viable. You should be able to execute it. You should be able to profitably scale it, and so on. Now, what happens is if you start paying more attention to these blocks, as opposed to getting caught up in, I would call it, cool stuff. What is cool today? Cool is, this company has raised this much money. It sounds cool, right? So it's very important that, or this fellow has done this advertisement with this film star. This sounds cool. So it's very important to stay away from flashy stuff and not let that distract you, and go back to your core fundamentals. If you have strong fundamentals and everything that you've learned in your business school, everything that you've learned in your business school, your marketing principles, your sales principles, your finance principles, your strategy principles, if you are able to apply that, trust me, I'm telling you, it will not matter. COVID should not matter. And remember, see, what is COVID? COVID is a shock. It's a huge shock. But please keep in mind that COVID is not the first time a shock is happening in our economy. Demonetization happened, right? COVID happened. In the middle, there were minor shocks, like GST was a shock, right? Then you had, I don't know if you guys are familiar, there is something called RERA, Real Estate Regulatory Act. This is more in the real estate space. Maybe in some other sector, it could be something else. This disruption happened, right? So keep in mind that you will keep having all these shocks. And we have lived the last, so many years with less shocks. But the future is going to be about more shocks. I mean, remember September 11 happened, 2008 happened. There's so many events that have happened, some good, some bad, which have basically, put a lot of question on your business model. So very important that you have a business model that can withstand some of these shocks. And shocks will happen whether you like it or not. So if you can build a business which with strong business fundamentals, your chances of success will be high. The rest of it is not in anybody's control. And my request to many of you is, when you're thinking of an idea, don't go with ideas, where you're not making money, or you're not making profit. Don't go with a business where you're doing continuous discounting. Don't get into, you're blowing investor money. Don't go with those things, right? And let that not motivate you. I would rather get motivated with, good principles, where someone has built great product, great experience. I mean, I always like to go back, and sometimes I appreciate companies like, maybe Tata's, the way they have built, Mahindra's, they have built successful companies, or for that matter, look at Taj Hotels. Than looking at, companies where, the fundamentals are not very strong.
Thanks for your answer, Prabhat. Namrata, would you like to take it from here?
Yes, sir. So my second question would be that, like, how do you forecast about the industry in the coming months? So, like you already mentioned about, after the COVID scenario and everything, but sir, like, what will be few things and few measures which you will definitely take after the COVID scenario?
See, honestly speaking, uh, a lot of the good things that we did is beginning to pay off, right? And as I mentioned, some of these strong principles. But you know what? So there's nothing fundamental that I need to change or we need to change. But there are some tweaking that needs to be done. So let me explain you what are some of the tweaking which we are thinking, right? So if you look at it, who are our customers? Our customers are essentially singles, who are staying in a co-living setup. or there are families or group of people. So what has happened is, with COVID, you have a lot of singles who have left Bangalore, who have left Pune, and who have gone back to their resident homes. There are a lot of them who have lost jobs. So work from home and job losses. By the way, job losses have been massive. There have been pay cuts. So what happens is it has led to a chaos and confusion. Everybody is scared what happened, right? It's led to uncertainty. So it is basically a lot of these people who have gone home where there has been high percentage of attrition. But if you look at families, families have not left cities. Families actually are getting even stronger now in the cities. Now a family is able to appreciate better homes because the husband is working from home, the wife is working from home, the child is attending classes from home, and if there are two kids, and if there is a parent, so they also have. So suddenly what has happened is the need for better homes, the need for bigger homes, the need for safer homes, the need for homes within gated communities, all that has gone up, and families have suddenly started to appreciate that a lot. So one of the tweaks which we have done is, instead of focusing too much on singles, we have now started focusing on families, right? Because remember, the asset is the same. It's just a little bit of a tweak. The second thing is the prices also have changed a little bit. There has been a little bit of a correction in prices. So what we have done is we have adjusted our pricing a little bit. And number three, what we have also done is, in terms of our acquisition, when we acquire new properties, we have changed our acquisition strategy, because now we are suddenly seeing a very high demand for, compact 2 BHK homes in these places. So suddenly what has happened is, we have tweaked our strategy. So what we have done essentially is, with COVID, we have just gone back and we have tweaked some of our business strategy. But there are 2-3 things which have become very, very important. And first and foremost is profitability. And second is cash management. There's a very interesting saying. They say that revenue is vanity. Profitability is sanity, and cash is reality. So if you really look at it, good business is not about just revenue. It's not even about profit. To me, I think cash management is the most difficult part in a startup, because you're dealing with, let's say, crore a month. Now there's crore coming, there is crore going. How do you manage all that? So suppose if you delay something, you're stuck with money, then you need an extra 50 lakhs from somewhere else to make that cash management. So cash management has become very, very critical for us. And of course, we have somebody very senior who runs our operations for us. And every day from morning till evening, he's looking at a cash position and he's helping manage it in a smoother manner. So basically, I would say these are some of the tweaks, but these are all short term. Long term, I feel that in the next, maybe a lot of them are beginning to come back. We see that a certain percentage will come back now. I also think there will be a certain percentage of people who will come back maybe by January, February, March, that time. And also keep in mind that the pressure, in my view, on a lot of these people to come back is going to be even more, because the next batch will come. So if you're staying at home, there will be a new batch will come and start taking your role. So there's going to be immense pressure on people also to come back and do things. And remember, work from home, we can sit and we can debate, but I don't know if that's going to be, that's a permanent solution. I feel that a certain percentage of work can be done from home. A lot of it will require physical interactions. It will require meeting, discussing. It's like a little bit like going back to college. I mean, how much of it you can do from home, right? You have to sit, you have to talk. It's your experience with the professor. It's your experience with your peers, right? It's also some of the, off classroom conversation and discussion. That's the real power of your education. So the same applies even in the corporate world. I think it's no different. I mean, so to me, I think a lot of it, all the disruptions, all the uncertainty is more temporary. It is just a matter of time. And I think a lot of it is going to come back in the next maybe 3 to 6 months at the most.
Thank you for
Thanks
answering.
for that. Yeah, good.
Thank you for answering the question, sir. So the next question is by Siralya. So she's asking, what difference of profit should be ascertained by deducting expenses from total income earned? And is there any profit percentage which determines the feasibility of the business plan?
See, this is a little too specific question, but I'll tell you the way I would look at business. So I think the first and foremost, I won't give you any prescription because any prescriptive answer to that, because it can vary from industry to industry, from organization to organization. But fundamentally, I think you need to look at the entire financials from the perspective of 4 or 5 key metrics. I think the first is your revenue, which of course is the most critical thing, right? You need good revenue. Now, whatever is that revenue, depending on your business, etc. Then comes the second one, which is your gross margin. Now, you need to have attractive gross margin. You need to have an attractive gross margin, because if you do not have an attractive gross margin, you will never be able to make money in a company at the end of the day. Because remember, your gross margin is minus your direct cost, which is your cost of revenue or cost of creating the product or cost of creating the service. Once you've done that, then comes your next stage, which is all about your, I would say, your operational expenses and your sales expenses. Once you've removed operational and sales expenses, which is more like your operating margin, you need to be, in double digit. Let's put it that way. You need to be in double digit, because now you have built a scalable business. So having a good double digit gross operating margin means you've built a scalable business. Everything after that is more one time, because remember, the cost of setting up an office, the cost of setting up a technology platform, all that can be spread over a larger base, and it just makes your margin better and better. Because remember, a lot of these numbers start to look better as you scale your business. So fundamentally, the last one is the EBITDA, right, which is your earning before income tax and depreciation. So basically, if you're clear about your revenue, you're clear about your gross margin, your operating margin, and your EBITDA. And I think there is no formula, but to me, first of all, everything has to be positive. And if you keep making increments of profits or incremental improvements, everything will start getting better. So I think this just needs very sound financial discipline, accounting discipline, just so that you're building a financially viable or economically viable organization. And to me, I think this is very important. And I was lucky to get a lot of these exposure during my corporate days, especially in my last job, where I was actually running a fairly almost like a 200 crore P&L. So that was a very good learning for me. And then I realized that by making 1 or 2 mistakes, you sometimes create a bigger problem. So it's better that you look at these numbers with a hawk's eye. So this has to be at least 20% of your job, or a certain percentage of your job. Maintain close attention to it, but rest of it should continue. Build a good product, make sure your customers say good about you, make sure that you have employees who are able to deliver services and so on.
Yeah, thank you, Prabha, for the answer. Like now we have like 2 similar questions, like so from Harsh and Ragesh. So the question is like the number of competition in Bangalore region is increasing, including like Rentmate, Grester, Oyo Rooms, like Oyo Homes. So how is your company trying to tackle with it in terms of the rising competition?
So that's a good question. See, in any business, right, there is going to be competition, right? You can't stop competition. But at this point of time, see, this is a market where the combined market share of all organized players is only 2.5%. So if you were to get all these companies that you just mentioned and put their market share, right, it is only 2.5%. So that's the first point, which means it's a big market. The second one is that of all these companies, right, all of them have their own priorities, but I think we are one of them who has focused extensively on good operations. Good operation basically means, higher tenure of tenants with us. Owners have been signing up for multi-year, which means they've been signing up for 3-year, 5-year, right? Our ability to respond to situations, whether it's an owner situation, tenant situation, has been very high. So the second point I think is operations has been very, very critical. Good operations to deliver customer delight, to win owner trust. It has been the backbone. And of course, this has been only possible because of our technology platform. Because remember, there is a very high degree of automation that happens all the way from managing discovery to managing tenant lifecycle to managing the asset, managing the owner, to managing the entire accounting process and so on, right? And of course, payments, because remember, there's so much of money floating around and so on. So I think the third one is our technology, which of course has been our biggest differentiator. So to me, I think these three things is what I think gives us the confidence that I think we are in a good position to deal with it. And many of the competitors that you mentioned, I think we are very well aware of their capabilities, their strengths, and with a lot of respect, I think they are also doing great things. But I feel the market is big, and if we stay focused on these fundamentals, I think we will be able to increase our market share. And also remember one thing: it is tempting, for us to assume that that the real competition are these 5, 6, 7, 8 companies. To me, the real competition is not these 4, 5 companies, right? To me, I think they are just, like the tip of the iceberg. The real competition is coming from the unorganized players. So we are actually competing with the unorganized player on the ground. And for that, I think some of the stuff around execution and technology becomes very, very critical for us.
Thank you for answering the question, sir. So the next question is asked by Raj. So he's asking that your business has a chicken and egg problem. So in general, so which customer segment should we target first?
So when you say chicken and egg, I didn't quite follow that, but yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So meaning that.
Go ahead.
So meaning that both the the rooms which you are taking on rent, I mean the owners of the rooms and the people who will hire those rooms. So both are your customers. So it's
Right.
like we cannot decide who to select first. So in that basis.
Got it. So I think that's a very, very smart question, for sure. But see, I'll tell you, let's be very clear about who is our customer. Owners are not our customers. Our customers are essentially the tenants. So we are very clear in our mind that the customers are our tenants, people who stay in our properties and who pay rentals to us. That's point number one. Point number two is we look at owners more like our partners. So basically, it's like this. For a minute, you can assume that there's an owner, there is your own room. We both come together to provide a service to an end consumer. So we look at owner as partners. We look at the tenants as our end consumer who's consuming our service. So with that lens, we look at it, right? And of course, there is, when you're dealing with a partner, you have to deal with high degree of maturity, right? And we are very clear about one thing as far as our owners are concerned. We want to be the trusted partner. Now, what does a trusted partner mean? A trusted partner means that let's have this relationship for a while. And a relationship over here is minimum 3 to 5 years. So if some owner comes and say, hey, listen, I just want to do something with only for 6 months, we're not interested in that business, right? Because then what happens is it takes a very transactional view. So just to give you a sense, today, if you look at the value of the signed contracts with all the homeowners, it's almost in the range of about 50 crores. And we do roughly about 7 crores a year. We talk about 7 into 7, right? That's the level of engagements that we have signed up with owners. So it's very important for us to have long-term commitments with owners, and then of course with tenants it's 11 months, and then it keeps getting renewed and so on. So when we go with owners, we always sign a 3 to 5 year minimum MOU, and the good thing is that most of them have been with us for a long time, and most of them, I think, once they have experienced our service, then they start to trust us. Because remember, we are handling their assets. It's like giving a baby to somebody and saying, manage the baby, right? So it's very, very important, and we have to also live up to that expectation. So it puts a lot of pressure from an operation perspective. So this game is a lot about doing good execution. Yeah.
So thanks, Pravak. So one more question is, how should we take our startup from idea to market if it's like feasible and viable?
Yeah. So basically, a startup to market. I think to me, the first point is creating a very clear business case or a business plan where you look at every element. Now, what are the various elements, right? First is there's a very clear problem, there's a clear need. And remember, it's very important not to fall for perceived need and a perceived problem. Many times, we start perceiving that, hey, somebody has this problem, but the guy really doesn't have a problem. So the first is define a problem, define a need, back it with evidences, back it with research data. That's the first point. The second is build a good solution, right? Make sure that you've got a very clear solution to solve that particular need problem. Third is do a very thorough market research in terms of determining the size of the market, look at the addressable market, right? Do a very clear competition benchmarking. Look at who are the competitors, right? And it's okay. I don't think we need to be worried about if there are competitions, right? There's competition everywhere, right? But make sure that you understand who are the competitors, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses. So benchmark them very well, right? Once you've done that, then you focus on how are you going to execute. Because remember, see, a startup is, to me, idea is easy. And these days, I mean, I have a 15-year-old son and a 11-year-old girl. Sometimes, when I sit and I chat to them, they come out with all these startup ideas. Because remember, getting an idea is not very difficult. I mean, if you're watching Instagram, if you're watching Facebook, if you're watching TV, you'll keep getting ideas. But I think the real test is, can you convert an idea into a reality? So the execution has to be very well thought through. Now, once you have all these things, before you start doing anything, to me, you need to do a prototype. You need to create a prototype, and you need to get your first few early adopters. And we had this challenge when we came out with this idea. Remember, I just thought that this was the right thing. I discussed with my co-founder. He also thought it was a great idea. But till we did not implement it and demonstrate that we could get money out of it, it was just a concept. So get your prototype out there, what you call the MVP, build your MVP, get your money out of your MVP. I think once you've done that, then you need to loop it back and you need to reiterate your entire process. Once you've done that, I think then you're ready for something big. And I personally think that in the entire journey, you need some trusted advisors. Now, who can be a trusted advisor? It could be a friend, it could be a family, it could be a professor, it could be anybody whom you feel comfortable with, right? And remember, a lot of advisors will come to you for no cost. So it doesn't cost. But I always think that sometimes, when you're building a startup, you always have some inherent biases, right? You don't want to listen to some answers. You always want to listen to good things. So it's okay if somebody comes and says, let's say if someone says it's a stupid idea, it's okay. There's nothing wrong in it. But you need to surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, who can come and tell you what is right, what is wrong. It will only help you be more successful. So to me, I think this is also very, very important, because I've always done this, in my career, where I've always tried to go to people and tell them, what do you think? Right? And many of them have said this won't work, that won't work. Even in our startup, when we started, it has gone through, I would say, iterations. And it keeps getting better. Somebody says, hey, why are you not doing this? Why are you doing that? Somebody will say, why are you in this city, not in that city? Why are you not pushing more for digital services? Someone will say, why are you not taking larger buildings? Somebody will say, why are you not going and serving senior citizens? Right? Because remember, that's a big market. So you will get a lot of ideas. But you, as a founder or as a CEO of the startup, you have to take a call, right? You're like the captain. You're playing a cricket match. Anybody outside can tell you how to bat and ball, right? But you're on the field. So it's very important, to have advisors and to take their advice and do whatever is right at real time.
Thank you for the answer, sir.
Yeah.
So Vasudha is asking, how is RERA a shock? Because it was to keep in check that builders, like to keep a check on the builders who are not meeting the target of constructions. Doesn't RERA didn't RERA bring more accountability like after this thing?
Yeah.
What do you
See,
think?
so if you look at RERA, right? RERA stands for Real Estate Regulatory Act, right? Now, remember, real estate as a sector is a slightly ancient, it runs in a slightly older manner, old school. And this is why there was a need to have more transparency in the entire process. Now, you would have heard of various scandals, you would have heard of some developers defaulting, and so on. There are a lot of stories out there in the public domain. So what the government wanted to do was they wanted to instill confidence in the mind of the consumer or in the minds of the homeowner. And to do that, they came out with RERA. RERA basically what it says is, listen, that all projects have to be registered on the RERA website. If you default, you need to pay a penalty to the homeowner. And one more very important thing is that whatever money you take from your owners or whatever money you take for the project has to be sitting in an escrow account. A good percentage, I think it's about 70 or 75%, should be sitting in an escrow account, which means that if I'm taking money for, let's say, project A, let's say I'm building Prabhat Residency, right? And I've taken money from all of you. I should put 75 to 80% of the money in Prabhat Residency. Then I move to another project. I've taken money for that. I have to put with that. So it's a lot about financial discipline. Because what happens many times, people move money, and after some time, people have lost track of which money is lying where, and projects get delayed. So to me, I think RERA is a very welcome move by the government, and it's only in the interest of the end consumer. Now the question is, how effective is RERA? It's too early to really form an opinion, but in my view, I'm optimistic that RERA will only do good things, and it will only bring in transparency in the real estate world, and it will bring in a lot of efficiency. Now, even remember, there's a fear in the mind of the developer that if I delay, there's an outcome of that, right? Or there's a penalty associated. So there'll be more discipline and so on. So hopefully, things will only get better with RERA. That's what I think at this point of time.
Thanks for the answer. Now we have a question from Varun. So he has asked, like, average age of entrepreneurs are coming down like day by day. So, but most entrepreneurs are failing. So what are the challenges that young entrepreneurs face, and how do they become successful? How do they overcome those challenges?
Yeah. See, age is a number, nothing more than that, right? So I think that before you start something, you got to be sure that yes, it's going to be successful, right? You can start, in college or right after college. You can do after 5 years after college. You can do 10 years. You can do 20 years. I think it's a personal choice that you need to exercise. And to me, I think you should experience something. You should have done something on your own before you can actually start building a company. Otherwise, your chances of mistake can be very high. I mean, imagine you go to a hospital and you have some student who comes and says, "Okay, come on, I'm going to operate you." How would you feel? Right? I mean, just think like that. Or let's say you have a professor, some student who comes and says, "I'm going to be a professor," right? Who has not cleared his papers well, or is just struggling to clear his paper, right? This is the reality. I think you need somebody who has seen things, right? So the chances of success is high. And second, see, entrepreneurship is also a responsibility, because you're dealing with people's lives, you're dealing with money. So let's say you're an entrepreneur and you hire 10 people and your company goes bust. Do you realize that you're playing with 10 people's livelihood? It's very important. And I am shocked that recently I put up an ad for a certain job. For one job I got 1,000 with resumes, 1,000 resumes, and out of the 1,000 resumes, I think about 200 or 300 were, these guys have been laid off and unceremoniously laid off. So please understand that, and why it was not their fault, right? They didn't do anything wrong. They're normal guys. They've been working hard, but somebody hired them without thinking why they hired them, and when the pressure came on them, they asked them to just let go. So what is happening is it is very important that entrepreneurship comes with a sense of responsibility, because it's not just about you. If it is you, it's okay. The damage is controlled. But remember, you will never be able to do anything on your own. You'll have 4 people, you'll have 5 people, you'll have 10, 20. So you have to deal with a very high sense of responsibility, because you're playing with people's lives. And remember, some of them could be married, some of them have kids, someone may have parents, someone may be paying rent. Everything gets affected. The third thing is you're also dealing with investor money. When you're dealing with investor money, when a shareholder is giving you money, you have to make sure that you're doing justice to the money, right? You're deploying the money for the right things and so on. So to me, I think more than age, I think it is you need a little bit of an experience, and it's okay if you probably work for 4-5 years, because remember, in 4-5 years you would have learned something. And what is the hurry to start something, right? I mean, don't be in a hurry to start anything, and don't do it just because of peer pressure or because of what I call FOMO, right? Which I'm sure many of you will be able to relate to it, right? Fear of missing out. Don't fall under pressure, right? Because this is serious stuff, and you have to be very clear that if you're starting something, it will become big, it will become successful, it will start with 1 crore, then become 10 crores, then 100 crores, right? And maybe after that it's okay, but it should not be that you start and after 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, you fought with 10 people, 10 people have lost their jobs. It does no good to anybody. And I think the failure rates are very, very high, and many times you will also see that people giving you advices, very weird advices, without any basis. So it's very important, because remember, today with social media, it has its own advantages, which I'm sure all of us know, but don't forget that there are a lot of disadvantages, right? Everybody is giving you, opinions. Somebody who was, it's like let's say I start giving you opinion on how to bat, and play a cricket match where I've never held a bat, right? I can give you, right? I can always tell you, hey, you should do like this, or you got to go, you hit a shot, and so on. So keep in mind that it's very easy now to give opinion on social media without having a basis. So to me, I would only suggest that don't be in a hurry, right? Make sure that you've learned things, make sure you believe in the problem, right? And you're committed to it, and then you take a plunge. So it's okay to take a little bit more time before you take a plunge than rush into it and and create more destruction.
So, Prabhat, so what about certain ideas where like being first is important? Like nowadays, like there's a lot of like network effect and ecosystem is like really important. So in case the companies that create that kind of ecosystem first, like they get the advantage. So what do you think about those? As should I still wait for like getting experience, or should I just go in and jump and like start the venture?
So first of all, see, I agree with the point that you always have a first mover advantage and so on. But what is but how does jumping and solving help, right? I mean, unless you are 100% sure about it, right? To me, I think you need to give it time. I don't know if there's a shortcut, because remember, you hear stories of people who have succeeded, but don't forget that for every one person who succeeds, there are people who fail. That stories don't come out, right? Nobody is going to tell you. And see, India is a conservative country, right? When I was in the US, one thing which I noticed is that if somebody failed, people will, they'll talk about their failure. In India, nobody talks about their failure, so they'll keep quiet. So what happens is you only hear about successful stories, right? You do not hear about failures that happens. And then I'm giving you examples. I mean, I'm shocked to see how there are so many startups that just close down overnight, right? They close down. So what happens is when you close down, suddenly what has happened is, you've just created so much of destruction of shareholder value, employee value, customers are going to get unhappy and so on. So I think it is okay to wait. And I think there is always a right way to do it. And see, if you very closely look at successful companies, right? And you will see that all of them have taken their time. It has not happened overnight. It has not happened in an ad hoc fashion, right? There are smart people who have thought through, who have learned, who have made mistakes, who have grown from 1 to 5 to 10, and so on. As opposed to overnight they have turned billionaire or millionaire. So again, this is just my view, right? I mean, I'm sure people will have different views, but I feel that there is no shortcut. I mean, right? You have to have very strong foundation to be successful. Otherwise, you're in a very fragile setup. Maybe you may get good valuations, but you'll have too much of swings. Today you are 1,000 people, tomorrow you'll become 300 people, right? And again you will become 1,200 people. That's not right. That's not the right way to run business, right? It defies all the logic that you have learned in business school. Then you don't need to go to business school. You can go straight from. In fact, recently I was reading an article where there was somebody who said, I don't need to go to college. Undergrad also. The person says, because of one person did very well from school and started some company that was successful, so there's no need to go to college. So what will happen is suddenly we will destroy a lot of these things by just picking one or two wrong examples. So to me, these are all I would call outliers. So it's better to go back to basics to build good stuff.
Yeah, that's very much true. Even like we talk about a lot of like startup founders like Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, everyone being like a dropout, and we say that every successful entrepreneur is a dropout. Whereas if you see the data, like people who are more educated are successful as per like the data says that. But we always like praise like everyone has to be a dropout. Yeah, so that definitely makes sense.
No,
So
see, that's more fashionable. See, please understand that there are certain things that are more fashionable, right? I mean, like dropouts, and these are because they make more news. That is the only reason, right? But I feel that to me, I think it's important that the building blocks are very, very solid. And just take examples, right? I mean, for a minute, let's pick examples from other industries. Medicine is a very good example. In like doctors. I mean, just take if you're a doctor and you dropped out in the middle of your second year and you're treating with somebody, playing with someone's life. I mean, look at the risk. Or let's say you're a lawyer and you've not done your education properly. It's very, or you're an accountant. Imagine you have given your books to somebody and the fellow has not done his CA properly. It's very risky. So the question, see, and this is one very important reason why, it is very important from an MBA perspective. Because see, from an MBA perspective, what you're learning is general management. And general management, there's one school of people who think that general management is just fluff, right? But then there's one more school of people who know that general management means strategy, it means operations, it means sales, it means marketing, it means accounting, it means finance, it means legal, everything. And that's what I learned at Stanford Business School, because they kept emphasizing on these things. And there's a scientific way of doing everything. So what happens is the minute you dilute the education, then the impact of the education is very different, right? And then you will have very, very ordinary quality MBA graduates. So it's very important that there's good focus on education. The fundamentals are very strong, and of course these are applied in real world.
Thank you for your answer, sir. So the next question is, sir, why did you specifically select Bangalore and Pune to start and not any of the northern states, sir?
Sure. So see, one of the reasons why I selected Bangalore was because since I graduated, right, and I graduated in '95. I have either lived in Bangalore or I've lived in the US. And of course, US was about 7 years. And I also lived for about 1 year in APAC. This was in Jakarta and Singapore. Right? So Bangalore is something where I kind of grew up. I grew up in the sense, at least, my, post college, I spent a good amount of my time. My understanding of the city was very good. Right. I have some very strong networks, relationships, and so on. Right. So this was one of the reasons why, we selected Bangalore. And Bangalore, of course, has all the other advantages, right? Look at the number of people who are working. If you were to just walk from Electronic City to Manyata and go via Outer Ring Road, you're talking about, I don't know, at least 10 lakh people working on just on that road. That's the number we are talking about, right? So that was the reason I selected Bangalore. But one thing was very clear in our mind, that we wanted to build a pan-India business. Now, to build a pan-India business, we wanted to make sure that the business works not just in Bangalore profitably, it also goes beyond Bangalore to one more city, and which has to be not in the southern part of the country, because south is anyway work. So we said if we go to Chennai, it won't make any sense, because the dynamics are very similar. I mean, though it's not exactly similar, but there's a lot of common things. So we said, let's try somewhere else. It could be north, or it could be west, or it could be east, wherever. So we started thinking on those lines. And the most logical point was Pune. Now, I had also worked for 1 year in Pune, so I had a bit of an understanding of Pune. But more importantly, my co-founder, he is he's from Pune. So, we had a very, trusted person from the founding team sitting there in Pune. We said, let's make Pune happen. Because remember, Pune has very similar characteristics of Bangalore. And Pune is nothing but also, remember, it's also a logical extension of Mumbai. So that's how I look at Pune. It's just about 4 hours. So we said, let's make it happen in Mumbai. In Pune. And that's how we started Pune. So we built a full-blown team in Pune, and we did it. Now that Bangalore has worked, Pune has worked, I see no reason why we cannot extend this across India to every other city. So that's where we are now beginning to think of Hyderabad. So we are actually currently also going through an investment round. So post that, we would like to go to Hyderabad, and maybe subsequently we would like to go to another, few more cities. We have about 3-4 cities in mind. We'd like to go there, but also keep one thing in mind, that see, when you're dealing with a city, the cost to run a city is high, because you have to set up an office, you've got to set up a team. So it is better to go in a phased manner than go in a big bang manner. And I don't want to take some names, but we have some people, like some competitors, who suddenly decided to go to 4 or 5 cities at one shot, and they failed miserably. Because what happens is, the minute you go to another city, you have to go visit that city, spend time in that city, and so on. And with Corona and COVID and all that, imagine the complexity, right? I mean, we have opened 4 cities. I personally will have to go to those cities. The key members of my founding team, some of the senior management will have to go to those cities. But with all these restrictions and limitations, a city, it's better to focus more on new product lines than go to rapidly in terms of expanding to new cities. And last point I want to add is, we have done it in tier 1 cities or metros. I'm very keen also to experiment, in some tier 2 cities, and we have a few cities that we've identified, but not right away, maybe the next couple of years.
Thanks for your answer. Maybe we'll just take one last question. So a quick question. So we all got a lot of questions. Like a lot of students are like asking a lot of questions. But what we can do is, maybe we can aggregate all the questions, and maybe we can share it with you. Maybe you can answer it whenever you have time. So just one last question. Maybe just an interesting question. If since you raised VC funding, so it's like, if a startup fails after 1 or 2 years, does the founders face any legal action from a VC or a angel investor?
Right. So see, first of all, when you raise money, right? See, if a company fails, there is no legal implication on the founders, right? Because remember, it's not a criminal offense for a company to fail. A company can fail because of market conditions. It can fail because of wrong, poor execution. It can fail because of so many factors, right? Remember, the founders are nothing but people who are just executing it. So I don't think it is, there's any legal implication on that. However, I think the way I would look at it is that if a startup fails, there is a lot of destruction of value. The value is economic value, it is people value, so many values. And to me, I think that is where, I was trying to mention earlier, that entrepreneurship is a lot about responsibility also, right? I mean, it's like this, you run a company or you run a startup to succeed, to make a difference, right? And make a difference to the larger society. And of course, to the shareholders, that goes without saying. So to me, it is very, very important that, if your investors have invested in you, and by the way, it's not just about VCs, it's about VCs, it's about angels, it's about family offices, institutional investors, anybody, right? If they are invested in your idea, I think it's very important that you succeed. Now you will make mistakes. It's okay. You don't have to be worried because if you do, if you are running a company, mistakes are bound to happen. But you need to do it in best faith. You've got to give it your best, and you need to make it successful. I think it's important to go with that mindset, that anything else, and not be worried about legal actions and all that stuff. There's so many companies that have failed. If you every day you see companies failing, closing down. I was reading some statistics recently in the news, shocking statistics. That's okay.
So thank you, Prasad. So it was a really helpful and interesting session. So I'll just ask Shalini to give a vote of thanks to.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our guest speaker of the day, Mr. Prabhat Tiwari, professors, and our valued guests. It is my privilege to propose the vote of thanks for this innovative and informative session. I, Shalini, on behalf of Impresario and the entire Zyme family, would like to extend a very hearty thanks to every person who shared their time with us today. We are obliged to Mr. Prabhat Tiwari for bringing out the unsettling journey an entrepreneur has to go through, still managing to build up an empire of pride and success. Thank you for letting us know and making us ponder over how important it is to be a thoughtful soul who tries to bring about a positive change in the society. Finally, I would like to acknowledge the audience for their noted questions and patience throughout the session, making this event a success. We conclude this session with the hope for a better society. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate that, and I really enjoyed the session. And I think the questions were very, very insightful. And wish you all the best. And thanks again, all of you. Thank you, Zyme team.
Actually, you were able to generate a lot of interest from the students as well. So because we got a lot of questions, and it's a really interesting space as well, like co-living space, like it's part of the sharing economy, like it's growing and it's interesting space. So it's going to even disrupt the most of the old traditional way of looking at things as well. So it's like really interesting. And thank you very much. It was nice hearing to it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Prabhat, as a professor,
Yeah.
when I listened to you from an young startup, so many keywords, you validated quite a lot of my teaching materials. Some of the students who are listening to me will vouch for it, validate that so many things you have validated. Thanks for that. Thanks for the takeaway from you.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you so much. I really appreciate those words, sir.
And people who are listening to us, like we also have like national B-plan competition. So anyone who is like interested in like submitting their ideas, we have like a lot of cash prize of up to 1,40,000 for the winners, so that you can use it as a seed fund for your idea as well. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
So thank you so much, all of you. And I'm available. You can always send me a LinkedIn invite. I'll be more than happy to accept. If there's any question, you can always email me. You can send me on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to be in touch with you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.